Pokémon Diamond and Pearl are the most beloved Pokémon games of all time, and like most Pokémon games, Magikarp is one of the Pokémon you can catch. But as the games tell you themselves, Magikarp is horribly weak, pathetic, a feeble, pitiful imbecile of a Pokémon, and the most weak and pathetic Pokémon in the world. Despite this, a few years ago I managed to beat Legends Arceus using only a Magikarp, and since I managed to beat the Sinnoh region of the past into submission with one, I wanted to see if I could do the same in the present day version of it. So in this video I'm gonna find out, and try beating Pokémon Diamond with only a Magikarp. Here are the rules I used. First, the obvious main rule is that I have to play through the game using a single Magikarp and nothing else. I'll sometimes need to have other Pokemon in my party to use HMs to progress on the overworld, but I can't use them in battles. You can catch a Magikarp as soon as the second town, so I'll play through the first few minutes with the starter normally, and then swap it out permanently once I'm there. Also, because I'm sure I'll get comments asking, I played Diamond rather than a generally preferred Platinum for a few reasons, which I'll explain when they come up later on. Rest assured though, it's a decision that'll make things more interesting. With that out of the way, let's get started. After watching TV, my neighbor fined me $11 million and forced me to go to a lake with him. The very start of the game wasn't any different from normal, since I didn't have Magikarp yet, but I did pick the water-type starter Piplup. The rival picks the starter that has the type advantage against yours, so since Magikarp is also water-type, this felt like the fairest way to go about things. So I fought through the first few battles with Piplup. This consisted of a Starly, a Lass, and 2 youngsters. Once I reached Jubilife City, I got lectured about how bad of an idea this solo run was, and then went to the Western Gate and got the old rod. One important thing to note is that using the old rod, the Magikarp you fish up here can be between level 3 to level 10. I made sure to only catch ones that were level 10. This is because Magikarp needed to be strong enough to win battles using Struggle. When a Pokemon runs out of PP for all of its moves, it uses Struggle, an attack that also deals recoil damage. Magikarp only knows Splash at first, a move that does nothing, so there wasn't an easy way to defeat trainers for money so I could buy healing items. So Magikarp had to be strong enough to survive a wild encounter using Struggle, so I could slowly get it experience. Fun fact, I didn't pay attention to this at first, and caught a level 4 Magikarp, and ended up basically soft-locking myself, since I had no money, and it took more damage from Struggle than it could deal. I had to restart the whole playthrough from scratch, so I made sure to catch a level 10 one this time. There are a few natures I would have preferred, but I eventually settled on a docile Magikarp, which was neutral and didn't raise or lower any stats. At this level, Magikarp only knows Splash, which does no damage, so I could enter battles against other Magikarp to drain Splash's PP without taking damage. At level 10, my Magikarp did more damage to them than it took from Struggle's recoil damage, so I could train slowly. As you might imagine, this was a very slow process. Without money for potions, Magikarp could only defeat one enemy before its HP got low, which forced me to heal it back to full at the Pokemon Center. So I drain Splash's 40 PP, defeat one enemy, heal Magikarp to full, drain Splash's 40 PP again to defeat one more Pokemon, and repeat over and over. This took ages, but as it got stronger, eventually it could start to defeat 2 Pokemon before I needed to heal, which made things slightly faster. I went until Magikarp reached level 15, which let it learn Tackle, finally giving it an attack I didn't need to drain Splash for. With that finally out of the way, I gave my rival his parcel, claimed the watch I clearly already had, and then headed east of town to fight the rival. This ended up being very simple. Magikarp was already well past the level of both of his Pokemon, and neither of them had super effective moves against it yet, so I just spammed Tackle. I didn't even end up needing to heal. As I mentioned earlier, money was a very limited resource at this point, and you drop a portion of the money you're carrying when you lose a battle, so as I worked my way towards the next town, I made sure to save before each trainer battle so I could reset if I lost, and I made sure to run back to the Pokemon Center every battle or two, so I wouldn't have to waste potions to heal. This made progressing a little slow, but I managed to take out every trainer on the way to Orberg City for some decent experience and money. I also made sure to grab all of the items available along the way, then sold everything that wasn't healing to help build up a bit more cash. I went into the mine to grab a few more items, and fought the trainers inside. They weren't too noteworthy for the most part, except for Worker Colin. Magikarp's Tackle isn't effective against rock types, and both his Geodude and Onix have moves that buff their defense, so I actually ended up having to abandon this battle, because Magikarp's damage was so small that Tackle's 35 PP would actually run out completely before Onix went down. So that boded well for the upcoming rock-type gym. I headed there to test the waters, and faced a near-identical issue against a youngster inside. Thankfully, he only had one Pokemon, so I managed to win after chipping away for long enough, but I actually ended up resetting after I won to go back to my last save. It took so many potions to beat him that it actually seemed like a better use of my limited resources to save them for the gym leader, and go train off more wild encounters, with the hope that better stats would help make a difference. I had an idea while I was training. Magikarp's only attack was Tackle, which was normal type, and ineffective against the rock types, but Struggle actually deals typeless damage, which meant it would hit them for a normal amount. The rock-type trainers I'd faced didn't seem to do too much damage to Magikarp either, so I thought that maybe if I went to the gym leader fight with some potions, I could struggle my way to victory and heal as needed. I decided to train up to level 19 for a 5-level advantage over the leader's strongest Pokemon, since to access Struggle, I now had to drain both Tackle and Splash, a combined total of 75 PP. Training was still time-consuming, but not quite as awful now that I had Tackle. I gave the gym leader a try at level 19. It didn't go as smoothly as I'd hoped. The basic concept of my strategy worked well enough. Struggle was dealing damage, and Geodude wasn't doing much to Magikarp. The problem came down to Geodude's defense. Each use of Struggle takes out approximately a quarter of Magikarp's HP, and combined with the damage Geodude was doing, I had to heal very often. But without a way to farm money, I couldn't get my hands on much healing. I managed to get past the Geodude, but the Onix took even less damage. Onix also has Screech, a move it can use to lower Magikarp's defense. Plus, the gym leader can heal his Pokemon too, effectively forcing me to chip away at the HP bars multiple times. I gave the fight a few tries, but I never got past Onix. So I got back to training. I gained 6 more levels to get Magikarp to level 25, an 11 level advantage over the gym leader's strongest Pokemon, but it still didn't seem to make much of a difference. Since the recoil damage of Struggle is fixed at around a quarter of a Pokemon's HP, having more HP didn't matter much. Magikarp's attacks did a little more damage, and the enemies did a little less, but I was about as successful as the first time. I also tried healing at the Pokemon Center, and trying to fight without Struggle. The lack of recoil damage helped with survivability, but since Tackle's damage was so much smaller than Struggle's, it ran out of PP against Onix. But it seemed like Onix ran out of PP for all of its attacking moves too, because it started spamming Stealth Rock and Screech, despite them not doing anything. This actually let me drain all 40 of Splash's PP in the battle too, and then I finally beat Onix with Struggle, but since Onix had lowered Magikarp's defense as much as possible, the Cranidos he sent out next took Magikarp out from more than half HP, and I only had 2 potions left at that point anyway, so it seemed like I still wasn't ready for this. So I went back to training again, and gained 5 more levels for Magikarp. At level 30, Magikarp learns its final move, Flail. This move deals more damage the lower the user's HP is. So used at full HP, it's very weak, but if your HP is super low, it can have a power rating as high as 200, on par with some of the strongest attacks in the game. Of course, since it's being used by a Magikarp, it's being backed by a fairly weak attack stat, and the attack is only that strong when Magikarp's HP is dangerously low, but even with higher HP it's stronger than Tackle and Struggle, so it definitely seemed like my best bet for the gym. I took on the trainers I hadn't been able to beat before, and I managed to win this time. I didn't even really use Flail. Tackle was stronger thanks to the increased levels since I last fought them, so I mostly used that. And then I went back to the gym. This wasn't a total landslide victory, and it still took a few attempts, but I did finally manage it this time. My approach was basically to spam Tackle on Geodude while it chipped away at Magikarp's HP, and when it got low, I switched to using Flail instead. Onix could still be a problem, because it could lower defense and make this glass cannon strategy risky, but eventually I got lucky, and had an attempt where it actually didn't lower Magikarp's defense a single time, so I was able to Flail over and over while it chipped away at Magikarp's HP, making Flail stronger each time. Since Magikarp was faster than the leader's Pokemon, if the enemy had low HP, I knew I could attack safely if it would take it out. So when Magikarp dropped to 2 HP, I used Flail anyway to defeat the Onix, and then healed when he sent out Cranidos. Cranidos can also lower defense, which made me a little nervous, but it wasn't strong enough to one-shot Magikarp. After a few rounds, it actually knocked Magikarp down to a single point of HP, but once again, since I knew it'd move first, I used Flail and defeated the Cranidos. And so, 11 levels after my first attempt, I finally claimed my first gym badge. To continue the story, I needed to use the Rock Smash HM, so I grabbed a Bidoof to use it. In Jubilife City, I had to fight some Team Galactic grunts with Lucas. This fight was almost effortless. In addition to Lucas using a Pokemon of his own, now that I was past the Rock Gym, I wasn't dealing with Pokemon with a resistance to normal type moves anymore, so Magikarp being overleveled meant even Tackle did good damage. And then it was off to Floroma Town. The trainers along the way weren't a problem, though one interesting thing is that these twins wouldn't battle me since I only had one Pokemon. Because money was so limited, along the way I was making sure to grab every hidden item I could so I could sell them for money. I found some Team Galactic grunts trying to steal $100 honey, beat them and had them pay me a combined $800, and then went to the Valley Windworks to fight Commander Mars. This fight was pretty easy too. Zubat can poison you, but Magikarp's tackle did enough to defeat it in 3 attacks, so as long as Zubat didn't do that within the first few turns, there was no problem. And then I headed off to Eterna City. Along the way, you have to go through Eterna Forest, where you have to team up with Cheryl. She fully heals your team after every battle, so tackling my way through the forest worked fine. I got to Eterna City before too long, and grabbed a few super potions from the shop. Then I headed for the next gym to try my luck. This is the Grass-type gym, and Grass-type moves are super effective on Magikarp, which made this slightly concerning. And this isn't a gym where you can avoid the trainers. You need to defeat them all to reach the gym leader. The damage their Grass-type attacks did was a little worrying, but a lot of them would try to inflict status ailments instead of attacking, so I actually got through the gym easily enough. Whenever Magikarp got paralyzed, I'd leave and buy an individual paralyzed heal from the shop, rather than going to the Pokemon Center and healing it there, so I could try and enter the gym leader battle at low HP for Flail. In the end, without ever healing Magikarp's HP throughout the gym, he ended up with 10 HP going into the gym leader battle. But her Cherubi was too strong for this strategy to work. It could use Leech Seed to drain Magikarp's HP and heal itself, Growth to increase its special attack, and Grass Knot for super effective damage. So I ended up healing Magikarp after all. This battle was an interesting one, because I basically couldn't allow her to use Leech Seed. Her next Pokemon after this one is Turtwig, which is pretty bulky and can buff its defense. The damage Magikarp dealt once it was buffed was actually outpaced by the healing from Leech Seed, especially since I had to heal sometimes too. So I reset the game if Cherubi ever used Leech Seed. Once I got past it without Leech Seed getting used, I could just chip away at the Turtwig. However, her final Pokemon Roselia was also an issue. Magical Leaf could defeat Magikarp in a single hit from full HP, but Turtwig also had Razor Leaf, which has a high chance of dealing a critical hit, which meant it wasn't really safe to stall against Turtwig to try and get Magikarp's HP low for a powerful flail on Roselia. It took me quite a few tries, but eventually I came up with a strategy that worked. Basically, I needed to get Magikarp's HP as low as possible against Cherubi, but I also couldn't stall against it because that risked it using Leech Seed. So I just had to try and defeat it as usual, and hope that things worked out such that Magikarp's HP was low going into Turtwig, while also not having it use Leech Seed. Once I got an attempt where that happened, I spammed Flail, and defeated it within a few turns. When Roselia came in, I couldn't afford to heal, because then Flail would be weakened, so I used Flail and hoped it would take it out. On my winning attempt, it didn't do enough to defeat it, but like the other trainers in the gym, Roselia tried for a status ailment instead of attacking, giving me the opening to use a second flail for the win. And with Roselia down, I claimed the second badge. And with that I headed off. After using Cut to enter this well-maintained property, I took on the Team Galactic building in Eterna City. Most of the trainers were pretty easy to defeat by just spamming Tackle. Commander Jupiter towards the end was more difficult though. Her Zubat wasn't much of an issue, but her Skuntank could lower Magikarp's defense, poison it, and do a strong physical attack, which added up to a lot of potential damage each turn. Since Zubat was pretty easy, I ended up using something pretty similar to the strategy I used in the gym. I got Magikarp's HP low against Zubat, so Flail would be powerful against Skuntank immediately. When Magikarp's HP was low enough, 3 Flails could defeat the Skuntank, so as long as it didn't use damaging moves on its turns, I could win. After winning and grabbing the bike, I took on trainers east of town for some extra experience and money, and then grabbed the Explorer kit from this guy. This lets you play a side mode, which doesn't really have much application in this playthrough, though it will let me do something cool later on. I headed for Veilstone City. Because Magikarp had gained such a level advantage for the first gym, I found that if I took on all the trainers I came across, there was a steady enough flow of experience for me to maintain that advantage as I went. Along the way I encountered Lucas, who gave me the Versus Seeker. This item lets you rematch trainers, which meant that I finally had a way to easily farm for money, as well as an easier way to farm experience. I also started avoiding hikers. Because they use rock types, they were always a pain to deal with, so I decided it wasn't worth the effort if it could be avoided. I also stopped by the Berry Master's house along the way. This guy gives you 1 berry per day, which was going to be a helpful mechanic later on. On the way to the next gym, I had to pass through Hearthome City. I went to the contest hall to get the dress and watch this cutscene, and then had to fight the rival. The Grottle was a little scary, because it had super effective moves, and I got a little careless against the Ponyta and got knocked down to 1 HP, but otherwise it was fairly easy. As I approached Veilstone, there was a mandatory battle against Ruin Maniac Calvin. He had a Bronzor, which was a Steel Psychic type, making it resistant to Magikarp's attacks, and turning the battle into a very long one. But after I beat it, he sent out Shieldon, a Steel Rock type, giving it a double resistance to normal type attacks. I ultimately managed to win just by healing and chipping away for long enough, but as you can imagine, it took a very long time. Other than that, things progressed fairly smoothly, and I finally rolled into Veilstone City with a cool $40,000 to my name. This city opened up several new options for me. First, I grabbed a coin case, and then paid $20,000 to get 1,000 coins at the game corner. I cashed them in for the metronome. This item boosts a Pokemon's attack power by 10% each time a move is used consecutively, so using a move twice in a row will make it 20% stronger, and so on. Since my only attack options were Tackle and Flail anyway, I thought this seemed like a good option. In retrospect, I'll say the Silk Scarf, which gives a flat 20% power boost to normal attacks, was probably the better choice, but I used the metronome for now. I also went to the department store. You can buy battle items here, like X attacks to buff attack in battle, X defends to buff defense in battle, and so on. Each item buffs a stat by 1 stage until the end of a battle, and the maximum buff is 6 stages. Buying a bunch was a little pricey for me at this point, so I just bought 6x attacks, 6x defends, and 6x special defends, enough that I could buff all 3 of those to full in a given battle. After that I headed to the next gym. Most of the trainers inside weren't particularly difficult, but many of them had Machokes with high defense, so the fights dragged a bit. The gym leader battle was kind of funny. Her first Pokemon was a Meditite that wasn't too strong, so I used 6x defense and 6x attacks to buff those stats as much as possible. While doing this, Meditite managed to chip Magikarp's HP down to 12, and also confused it. Magikarp hurt itself on my first attempted attack, and knocked itself down to 4 HP, but I took a risk and tried to flail again anyway, and it snapped out of confusion, and proceeded to sweep her whole team with flail. A very satisfying change of pace after the last few gyms. And with that I grabbed the 3rd badge. Outside of the gym, I found out that Lucas's approach to completing his Pokédex was dropping it and getting robbed, so now I had to help him get it back. I went to the department store to grab more X attacks. I didn't restock X defense at this point, my thinking being that maybe for the next while, I could just sweep teams with Flail like I just had. Lucas's Pokédex was held by 2 Team Galactic grunts. I expected this to be pretty easy, but it actually ended up being slightly challenging. It's a double battle with Lucas on your side, and the opponent's Beautifly had Mega Drain, which was super effective on Magikarp and healed Beautifly. I ended up losing my first attempt to a critical hit Mega Drain. Lucas also seemed pretty useless at first. His Clefairy would do incredible things like strength and gravity. On my second attempt though, Lucas started having Clefairy use Metronome, which is a move that allows it to randomly use almost any move in the game. And it proceeded to use Horn Drill on Beautifly for a 1-hit KO, Magma Storm to defeat the Stunky, and then it was a 2v1 against the remaining Grunts Pokemon, and they went down pretty easily. I went into the warehouse and grabbed the Fly HM, but I'm no wimp. Fast travel isn't mandatory for progression, so I decided I would not get an HM user for it, and I definitely wouldn't change my mind later either. I left town to the south to get to Pastoria City, and the first trainer along the way was actually a bit of an issue. She used ghost types, which were completely immune to Magikarp's attacks. The only way I could damage it would be to use Struggle, since it does typeless damage as I explained earlier. But that seemed like a major pain. She actually is a mandatory fight if you want to go this way, but you can get to Pastoria City from the other side as well. So I headed to Pastoria from the other side, taking out most of the trainers along the way without too much issue. Once I reached Pastoria, I continued past it, and basically worked my way back to the route I'd abandoned in reverse, taking out the trainers for experience and money. Once I was back in town, I headed into the Great Marsh before taking on the gym. This is an area where you can form friendships with Pokemon by throwing mud at them instead of having your Pokemon assault them, but I was only interested in some of the items inside. I grabbed a nugget, which you can sell for good money, and a rare candy, which immediately levels a Pokemon up. I didn't use the rare candy yet though. I figured that when I was closer to the end of the game, I could go around and collect them all, and get a big chunk of the later levels more easily. After that I headed into the gym. I wasn't too worried about this one. It's the water gym, and Magikarp is also water type, so I didn't think it would be taking too much damage. This ended up being fairly accurate for the most part. I let each trainer chip away at Magikarp, thinking I might try a flail strategy against the leader, but the final trainer defeated me, so I decided I'd focus on buffing stats instead, and went back to Veilstone to grab more of the buff items. And sure enough, with these items the gym leader battle ended up being super easy. His first Pokemon is Gyarados, and it knows Dragon Rage, which always does a fixed 40 damage. So I basically just used X attacks, and tried to keep Magikarp's HP slightly above 40 with heals, so that when Gyarados used Dragon Rage it was guaranteed to knock Magikarp down to low HP. This ended up working first try. Even though I was buying super potions for healing at this point, I still had a regular potion on me from earlier, so after a number of turns of buffing and healing, when Magikarp's HP dropped to 24, I decided to use the regular potion to bring it to 44, hoping that Gyarados would use Dragon Rage to drop Magikarp's HP to 4. It did, and I proceeded to sweep his entire team with Flail. I healed up at the Pokemon Center, and then watched this guy run off with a bomb. My rival decided that losing to me was more important than stopping a bomber and fought me. My plan initially was to fight without bothering with the stat buffs, so I actually used Tackle on turn 1, before remembering that he had the grass starter. So I decided not to risk it, and employed a similar strategy to the one I'd used at the gym, which was similarly successful. I caught up to the grunt at Valor Lakefront, and the battle went without much incident. Cynthia gave me medicine to use on the Psyduck I'd passed earlier, so I headed up to Route 210 to use it, and Cynthia now forced a second chore onto me, delivering a charm to her grandmother. I headed north to deliver it. I got to Celestic Town before too long, where the town elder showed her wisdom by urging a child to fight a man making bomb threats. This fight was fairly simple too. His first Pokemon was a Beautifly, which was a little worrying after the battle in Veilstone, but things ended up working out pretty nicely. It used Stun Spore to paralyze Magikarp, and then Mega Drain to deal big damage. I used Flail, and because Magikarp was paralyzed, it moved second, and the Beautifly's next attack dropped its HP super low, so Magikarp's Flail took it out. His next Pokemon was a Croagunk, and I decided to gamble on Croagunk using a non-damaging move, and used Flail since I thought it would finish it off. Croagunk actually did use a damaging move, but it was weak enough that Magikarp still didn't faint, and Flail took out Croagunk from full HP with a critical hit. After delivering the charm and looking at the ruins, I headed back to Hearthome City for the next gym. This one I wasn't looking forward to. The gym leader here uses ghost types, which are immune to normal type attacks, so Magikarp couldn't attack them. The only way to deal damage in this gym would be to drain all of the PP on Magikarp's moves so it could use Struggle. Thankfully, unlike many gyms, you can avoid every single trainer inside, so I could just drain Magikarp's PP outside of town, and then head directly to the gym leader. This fight was a bit of a strange one. Because Magikarp was going to be taking recoil damage from Struggle, I wanted to make sure he was taking as little damage as possible from the enemies, so I started by buffing Defense, Special Defense, and then Attack as much as possible, before starting with Struggle. I got lucky and actually took out Drifblim instantly with a critical hit, but the Mismagius she sent out next was trickier. It had Magical Leaf, which was super effective, Confuse Ray to confuse Magikarp, and Shadow Ball for a chance to lower Special Defense. It confused Magikarp, so the fight ended up taking a while. I had to heal Magikarp's HP high enough that it could survive Magical Leaf and Struggle's recoil damage on the same turn, and then attempt to attack, and if it hurt itself from confusion, the cycle continued. I also wanted to keep Magikarp's special defense up, so I used a few X special defense when Shadow Ball lowered it. My first successful attack took out over half of its HP, so when I was eventually able to do another attack, it went down. Finally, Gengar wasn't as challenging. It could poison and confuse, but didn't do a ton of damage otherwise, so I didn't bother curing the poison and just attacked it. A single struggle almost defeated it, but not quite, so the leader healed it back to full. But 2 more struggles took it out, and with that I claimed the 5th badge. With that done, I had to go to Canalave City. I needed to use the Surf HM to get to Canalave, so I caught a new HM user and used it with that. Once I reached town, I headed to the Pokemart to grab some Hyper Potions, which heal for 200 HP each, a full heal for Magikarp at this point. Before I could reach the next gym, I had to fight the rival again. Next up was the gym. I wasn't looking forward to this one. This is the Steel-type gym, so they've all got high physical defense, and Normal-type attacks are also not very effective against them. Also, as with Shieldon before, Rock-Steel dual types have a double resistance to Normal-type attacks. And wouldn't you know it, the gym leader has Bastiodon, Shieldon's evolution. Fortunately, it wasn't like Steel was super effective on Magikarp or anything, so it was basically just a gym of slow chip damage. I headed back to Veilstone to stock up on more stat buffing items, and then took on the first trainer inside the gym. I tried buffing up attack all the way, and a critical hit tackle looked like this. So I was certainly in for a fun time. This Steelix was actually a problem in a number of ways. It had Screech to lower Magikarp's defense, and also had Double Edge to do a huge amount of damage. But it also had the move Torment, which prevented Magikarp from using the same move twice in a row, which prevented me from capitalizing on the damage with Flail. But even if I wanted to capitalize on it, its defense was so high that even a powerful Flail would take a few hits to defeat it. After considering the fight for a while, I decided to go with the struggle strategy again. Since the move deals typeless damage, I thought it might do better damage than Magikarp's normal attacks. To help with this, I went to this house in town. The move Deleter lives here, so I used him to make Magikarp forget Splash. Now it only knew Tackle and Flail, so I didn't have to worry about Splash when I wanted to use Struggle anymore. I drained the moves outside of town, and then went to the gym. Since Struggle deals recoil damage, I had to be careful, but I did manage to win the very slow battle with healing and buffs. There are many unavoidable trainers in this gym, and they all played out in a very similar way. Because of this, as I got closer to the gym leader, I actually ended up running low on potions, so I ended up leaving and headed back to Route 212. I used the Versus Seeker to rematch Gentleman Jeremy and Socialite Reyna here. They give out decent experience, but also quite a lot of money. I fought them over and over until I had over 200,000 Pokédollars, and Magikarp hit level 50 as well. I used the money to buy 99 Hyper Potions. Then I headed back to Veilstone and loaded up on the stat buff items again as well, so I wouldn't need to make the trip back anytime soon. Bear in mind that I still wasn't using Fly at this point, so I'd been running across the entire region on foot every time I came here. And with all that done, I went back to the gym in Canalave. The fights continued to be lengthy, but I didn't have to worry about items anymore, so I just kept chipping away until I won. And at long last, I reached the gym leader. This battle was an absolute chore. His first Pokemon was Bronzor, which wasn't too terrible. It could confuse Magikarp or put it to sleep, but its damage wasn't too crazy, so I buffed Magikarp's stats, and then started attacking. Bronzor could deal quite a lot of damage with a critical hit though, so I generally tried to keep Magikarp's HP above around 50 to be safe. It took quite a while, because even a fully buffed Tackle's damage looked like this, but eventually I took it down. His second Pokemon, a Steelix, was a similar story. And finally, Bastiodon. Fighting this thing was dire. The damage it took from Magikarp's attacks was so small that sometimes its HP bar didn't even move. It also had moves that buffed its defense even further, and had Rest to heal itself completely. It couldn't even do that much damage to Magikarp. It was basically just an impassable wall. I honestly thought that this might just end up being an accidental stall, where it took so long to beat Bastiodon that it'd end up running out of PP and defeating itself with Struggle, but after using Struggle myself and healing for a while, Magikarp eventually landed a critical hit. Critical hits ignore defense boosts, so it actually did a ton of damage. And after healing, I was able to do one more Struggle to win. And with that, I was finally done with what was probably the worst gym in the game so far. Outside, the rival forced me into the library, where I enjoyed a strangely off-center cutscene and history's most inconsequential earthquake. After that, we find that rumors have managed to spread in the 15 seconds since the earthquake happened about its precise source and cause, so I headed off to Lake Valor. Inside the cave was Commander Saturn. This fight was a slight challenge. His Kadabra has a move called Embargo, which prevented me from using items on Magikarp for a few turns, and also disabled held items for that same duration. Keep this move in mind for later, by the way. It also did a lot of damage with its attacks. Fortunately, it wasn't so strong defensively, so beating it quickly was pretty easy. I just had to reset the game until it attacked on its turn rather than using Embargo. I did a Tackle turn 1, took a hit, and used Flail to defeat it, bypassing Embargo altogether. His next Pokemon was a Bronzor, so like all the other Bronzor I'd encountered, it wasn't very difficult, but it took a long time to chip away at it. And his final Pokemon was no problem. Next, I had to go to Lake Verity near Twinleaf Town. The grunts here went down easily enough, but Commander Mars was more difficult. Her first Pokemon was a Golbat, and it was fairly powerful. It had decently strong attacks, and also had Toxic, which it could use to badly poison Magikarp. When a Pokemon is badly poisoned, the damage it takes from it gets stronger each turn, so it would eventually start dealing huge damage. My strategy wasn't too different from usual though. I buffed defensive stats, then buffed attack and fought with Tackle. I didn't bother with Flail since her attacks and the poison were scary. When Magikarp did get poisoned, I let it stick around for a few turns until the damage had grown enough to be concerning, and cured it then. This Golbat alone took a few tries, but I did eventually manage to beat it. I won the whole battle on the first attempt where I got past Golbat though, because the rest of her team wasn't very difficult. The professor claims that we have cause to celebrate because these children weren't harmed by the criminals before demanding one of them set off to fight more criminals, and so I set off for the northern end of the region. Along the way I realized I'd forgotten to get the Strength HM earlier, which was mandatory now, so I headed to the Lost Tower and grabbed it, and then headed north. I avoided as many trainers as I could on the way north. This was because the snowstorms meant that the battles themselves featured hail, dealing a bit of unavoidable damage every turn. The enemy Pokemon themselves were also starting to get trickier as the game went on, so dealing with them while also dealing with the hail damage didn't seem worth the effort. There were a few mandatory trainers though. Ace Trainer Dalton was pretty challenging. His first Pokemon was a Raichu, which had super effective moves, and combined with the hail damage, Magikarp could lose a huge amount of HP in a single turn. My plan at first was to buff Magikarp's special defense until it was buffed as much as possible so it could withstand attacks more easily, but I could only really afford to use one when Raichu didn't use Thunderbolt, and used one of its weaker physical attacks instead. So I spent a lot of time healing between each buff, to the point that by the time special defense was maxed out, Raichu's HP had already been half depleted by the hail. well, so I decided to just keep going with the accidental stall strategy, and buffed attack as well until it fainted to the hail. His next Pokemon replaced the hail with a sandstorm, which did the same kind of thing to Magikarp, except the enemy was immune to it. It also had Earthquake, which took out more than half of Magikarp's HP in physical damage. I managed to buff Magikarp's physical defense, but before I could buff attack the rest of the way, I lost to a critical hit Earthquake. So on my next attempt, I started buffing physical defense instead of attack, so that when his next Pokemon came out, Magikarp's defense would already be good and it would be easier to buff attack from there. This worked out a few attempts later, and his final Pokemon was no problem. And with that I made it to Snow Point City. Even though the rival ran all the way north in a panic so he could check on the lake, apparently he wasn't panicked enough to not defeat the gym leader here first. This gym is Ice type. Because some of the Pokemon can summon hail themselves, I didn't want to bother with the trainers here, and thankfully this is another gym where you can avoid all the trainers on the way to the leader. This battle was pretty tough. The main issue here was that despite being the Ice gym, the leader's first Pokemon had the Grass type move Razor Leaf, and her second Pokemon had the Grass type move Wood Hammer. Both of these could defeat Magikarp with a critical hit instantly even when its HP was close to full. Because of this, healing and buffing up its stats from the get-go, and then working my way through the team as usual didn't work so well. The battle also featured hail. What ended up working was keeping a close eye on Magikarp's exact HP. I buffed Magikarp against Snover, operating under the assumption that Razor Leaf would never crit. Hail dealt exactly 6 damage to Magikarp, so against Snover, I buffed up Magikarp's attack as much as possible, and then kept healing and buffing other stats until Snover did an attack that knocked Magikarp as close to 13 HP as possible. It ended up being 14 on the winning attempt. Once this happened, I used Flail to defeat Snover, and the hail knocked Magikarp down to 8 HP, low enough that I could immediately defeat the Abomasnow with another Flail. Since I'd made sure Magikarp's HP was above 13, it was able to survive that turn's hail with 2 HP, and then I healed it back up and took out her Sneasel with Tackles. Her final Pokemon was a Medicham, and I guess the game took pity on me after I tried the battle for an hour, because I used Tackle, and Magikarp scored a critical hit to take it out from almost full HP. And with that I claimed the 7th badge. After healing up, I headed to the lake, where I found the rival getting lectured, and then I headed to the Team Galactic headquarters in Veilstone City. This place wasn't too difficult for the most part. Most of the trainers could be avoided, and for the ones I did have to fight, buffing attack and using Flail worked well enough. The boss Cyrus at the end wasn't too bad either. His first Pokemon was Honchkrow, and it knew Embargo, so if it used that at a bad time it could prevent me from healing and defeat me, but as long as it didn't do that, I could buff Magikarp up and get through his team easily enough. After finding Team Galactic's Lime Jello reserves in the next room, I had to fight Commander Saturn. This one was slightly harder. His first Pokemon also had Embargo, and it also had attacks that took out over half of Magikarp's HP. It took a few tries, but what eventually worked was waiting for an attempt where he didn't use Embargo. If I buffed Special Defense on the first 2 turns and he attacked on both of those turns, Magikarp's HP would be knocked low enough for Flail to instantly defeat it, and once he sent out Bronzor, I could just heal up, buff up the rest of Magikarp's stats, and Flail the rest of his team once its HP got low again. After freeing the Pokemon, I headed back to Route 212 to farm more money. My stat buffing items and potions were starting to get low again, so I wanted to stock up on more for the next stretch of the game. I decided to farm here until Magikarp hit level 60, and I had over 500,000 Pokédollars by the time that happened, so I stocked everything back up. I used my Master Ball to catch a Bibarel so I could teach it HMs, and then headed up Mount Coronet. There were a few Team Galactic grunts on the way up, but they weren't very difficult. At Spear Pillar at the top of the mountain, the first battle was a bit interesting. It's a double battle, and like some of the other ones, they don't battle you if you've only got one Pokemon. But unlike the others, they actually force you back if you've only got one Pokemon. So I had to revive Bibarel and start the battle with that. This battle took a few tries. I realized too late that I only had a single poison recovery item left, and the enemies could badly poison. To start, I buffed Magikarp and Bibarel's attack. In Bibarel's case, it was just to waste turns until it got defeated. Funnily enough, the enemy Pokemon on the left side used Memento to self-destruct and lower my stats, so Bibarel actually ended up getting some experience for doing nothing. Eventually, the enemy did beat Bibarel though, and then I could start fighting back. I waited until the remaining Pokemon on the left side used Memento to take itself out too, and then I started attacking. It wasn't too difficult all things considered, but since I only had one poison recovery item, when it badly poisoned Magikarp, I basically kept an eye on how much damage it did, and only cured it when the damage was getting big. The final Pokemon also poisoned Magikarp, so after I won the battle, I just ran around. In this generation, a poisoned Pokemon will always cure the poisoning and survive when it drops to 1 HP on the overworld. Up ahead were Cyrus and the commanders. Cyrus summoned Dialga, to the terror of all the citizens of Sinnoh, and then I had to fight the commanders alongside the rival. This sequence was a bit tricky. I lost several attempts to critical hits or poison damage, but even when I did eventually win, you're immediately thrown into a fight against Cyrus, and he opens with his Haunch Crow, which once again had embargo to prevent me from using items on Magikarp. If you lose to Cyrus, you have to fight the commanders again before you can fight him again. I'm sure that if I only had to fight Cyrus, I could have just rolled the dice until he didn't use embargo, but since I had to fight through the somewhat difficult commander battle before each attempt, I decided to get Magikarp stronger before I tried again. First, I finally said screw it and caught a Starly to use Fly for fast travel. I used it to get to the Berry Master's house. I mentioned earlier that this guy was going to be helpful later on, and I was going to take advantage of that now. Longtime Pokemon fans are probably familiar with effort values, but to give a very quick summary for those who aren't, every Pokemon gives out an effort value when defeated. For example, Shinx gives out 1 attack EV when defeated, so use Magikarp to defeat one and it'll gain 1 attack EV. EVs raise that stat, so attack EVs make a Pokemon's attack stronger. The main EV I wanted was Special Defense, in preparation for a specific fight you'll see later, and you can't access any Pokemon that give out Special Defense EVs early in the game, which is why I didn't pay attention to them until now. But I wanted to EV train at some point, so I decided to get it out of the way now. Because I hadn't paid attention to Magikarp's EVs, they were basically just a random mess, which is why I came to the Berry Master. He has berries that lower each EV, so you can use them to essentially reset them. He only gives you 1 berry a day, but you can set the system clock to 11:59 PM, let the clock roll over to the next day, then save and soft reset until you get the berry you want. This took quite a while, but eventually I got enough berries to completely reset Magikarp's EVs. Then I headed to Veilstone City. I went to the game corner and finally got the Silk Scarf I mentioned earlier, which gave a 20% power boost to normal type attacks, and then went to the department store and bought vitamins, which you can use to boost a particular EV by up to 100 points. I boosted the attack and special defense EVs by 100, and then went and fought wild Pokemon for hours to get those 2 EVs up to 252, which provided the best boost. I also boosted the HP EV to 4 as the last stat. You have to count these yourself, so I might have miscounted a bit, but they were around that level anyway. By the time I got done with this, Magikarp had reached level 66. Next I wanted to go around and collect all the rare candies I could currently access. I thought at first that I might try to save these for when Magikarp had reached a higher level, so I could get him up to 100 easily, but then I realized that I'd have more options for training if I got closer to the end of the game, so I ended up using the candies now to get him up to level 77. And with all that out of the way, I headed back up to try again. I actually lost my first attempt against the commanders to a critical hit, but I got them pretty easily on my second try. With Magikarp being so much stronger now, I just buffed it up and used Tackle, and it took out every Pokemon in a hit or two. Cyrus was up next, and I managed to beat him this time too, though I do think it was still slightly reliant on luck. Most of Honchkro's attacks didn't do too much damage, but Drill Peck could do quite a bit, so I feel like if it spammed that I could have lost. So I buffed defense and healed when embargo wasn't active, so Drill Peck wouldn't do quite so much, and then tackled until it went down. Although Magikarp's HP got low a few times when I wasn't able to heal, Honchkro never used Drill Peck enough times in a row to take it down before embargo wore off, and once it was down, I was able to buff Magikarp up the rest of the way and defeat the rest of his team easily enough. Next up was Dialga. And with that finally done, I left and headed off to Sunyshore City for the final gym. The gym leader apparently recognized my toughness, so I headed to the gym to take him on. The final gym is electric type, so unfortunately, this was another one that was super effective on Magikarp. But most of the trainers inside actually weren't that much of an issue. In the first battle, the enemy got Magikarp's HP pretty low, so then I just used Flail and took out the rest of the gym fairly easily. The only trainer this didn't work on was the one with the Steelix, so rather than entering the battle at low HP, I healed Magikarp up before the battle, then buffed its attack until its HP fell below half, and spammed Flail once it did. The final gym leader wasn't very hard either. It took a few tries because I had to get lucky with the order of the moves he used, but it was pretty simple. Basically, I just buffed Magikarp's attack every turn, and he used his Raichu to do various things. Because I was trying to use Flail to win, I was specifically trying to get Magikarp's HP low without it hitting 0. So I lost a few attempts because he'd do a Charge Beam that took out more than I expected or something. But eventually, on the winning attempt he used Charge Beam and 2 Brick Breaks, which got Magikarp's HP low enough that I spammed Flail, and I had been able to use enough attack buffs to one-shot his entire team. This incredible tactic single-handedly reinvigorated the gym leader's love for battling, and with that I claimed the final badge. Next up was Victory Road. I took out most of the trainers along the way. Some of them were trickier than others, but for the most part it was pretty easy with Flail. Magikarp got up to level 82 by the time I reached the league. Once I was there, I purchased full restores and 164 Pokeballs. That latter purchase will make more sense later on, though it turns out that I actually only needed 1. Before I could enter the league, I had to fight my rival one more time. I couldn't seem to do it. The usual buffing strategy didn't work, because the Staraptor he opened with would use U-turn to switch into Torterra, and then it would often take Magikarp down with Leaf Storm, and Magikarp wasn't strong enough to defeat Staraptor before it switched out. so I decided to leave and train up some more. I went to Route 222 and fought this trainer repeatedly using the Versus Seeker to get Magikarp up to level 86, then went back to Victory Road to grab 2 rare candies I'd missed, which got it to level 88. With a 6th level boost, I went back and tried again. It took a few tries, but I did manage to win this time. I started the battle by buffing Special Defense exclusively. When Staraptor used U-turn to switch into Torterra, the biggest danger was Leaf Storm, which is a special attack. But every time Torterra uses it, its special attack goes down. The rival never buffs his stats, so this effectively meant that if I could survive the initial powerful Leaf Storm, it got progressively weaker. So, once the first Leaf Storm did come out, I swapped to buffing Physical Defense to withstand Torterra's other attacks like Earthquake, then buffed its other stats and beat up his team with Flail. And with that, the league was open. My idea at first was to train by throwing Magikarp at the first Elite Four member over and over, just tackling and flailing and seeing how many Pokemon I could defeat without healing. But defeating even one like this was hard, and it barely gave more experience than a Gyarados from the guy on Route 222, so I decided to keep using him to train. I'd made it all the way to the end of the game, so I figured it was probably time to get Magikarp the rest of the way to level 100 now. So I did just that. I attacked this lone fisherman mercilessly for hours, and eventually Magikarp reached level 100. With that done, there was nothing stopping me from going to the Pokemon League to beat the game, but there was one more set of battles I wanted to take care of first. Back at the very start of the video, I mentioned that I made the specific choice to play on Diamond rather than Platinum for a few reasons, and one of those reasons was finally coming into play now. Like most games in the series, the 4th generation Pokemon games had special Pokemon given out through limited time events. This included several mythical Pokemon, where you got an item that let you access an otherwise inaccessible area, and do a unique battle against them. Since these were from limited time events, these battles have been officially inaccessible for nearly 2 decades. But in Diamond and Pearl, you can make use of out-of-bounds glitches to make it to these areas and fight them, and I didn't think Magikarp could truly claim dominion of the Sinnoh region if it passed up a chance to defeat the god of creation. I won't go into too much detail since it's a bit beyond the scope of this video, but if you're interested in learning how to do these glitches yourself, I'll leave links to tutorials in the description. But basically, the game loads its overworld map in chunks, so it looks seamless to the player. If you run north, it'll load chunks north of you and unload the ones south of you. By getting on the bicycle, setting it to the lower gear, and then moving like this, you go over the lines dividing these chunks in such a way that the loading gets messed up, with chunks being missing or loaded in the wrong places. Once I did this, I went up and then left down this street, to get into this route that's loaded on the wrong side of town. Then I had to do a bunch of steps to reach the mythical Pokemon out of bounds. There really are a lot of steps to these tricks. Sometimes you'll be going thousands of steps in given directions out of bounds, so again, check those tutorials in the description if you want to know the specifics. But basically, I was able to bike through the ocean to reach New Moon Island for Darkrai. It's only level 40 though, so it was basically just a formality. A few tackles easily took it down. Next up was Shaman. Shaman was only level 30, even lower than Darkrai, but it actually put up a slightly better fight. It was Grass type, so its moves were super effective on Magikarp, and it also had Leech Seed and Synthesis to heal. For fun, I decided to specifically avoid healing in the battle against it, and Magikarp's HP actually got kind of lowish, but that meant a Flail could get me the win easily. And last was Arceus. I was scared to lose out of bounds, because I didn't know if it would mess something up and force me to do the trick over again, so I played very overcautiously. The fight honestly wasn't that hard though. Arceus only has special attacks, so I buffed Special Defense, then buffed Magikarp's attack, and then took it down before too long. And with that out of the way, it was finally time to prepare for the Pokemon League. First I went back to Route 212, and farmed the trainers there for money again. Then I went and bought the stat buff item so I had 100 of each, just to play it super safe for the league. I also sold off some items I'd been hanging onto but had no use for, and used my remaining money to buy more full restores. Next I went to the Berry Master's house again to get 10 Lepa berries, which heal a move's PP by 10. Finally, I decided to play it extra safe, and farmed a bit more money to grab more full restores for the league. The first Elite Four member was the bug user Aaron. This was a perfect first battle. For reasons you'll see later, I wanted to try and whittle down Magikarp's PP as I went through the league, without letting it drop to 0 until I reached the end. This was also part of the reason why I grabbed Lepa berries from the Berry Master. The reason Aaron was a good first opponent was because his first Pokemon is a Dustox, with only one attacking move. All its other moves are buff or status moves, so it was pretty easy to burn some of Magikarp's PP against it. After buffing up Magikarp's defensive stats, I decided not to buff attack and used tackle, but Dustox had raised its evasiveness enough that Magikarp couldn't land a hit, and that worked well for me since it let me burn through Magikarp's PP, occasionally using a full restore when its HP got low. Eventually I decided I'd burned enough, so I buffed Magikarp's attack, somehow landed the first buffed attack after missing every single unbuffed one, and proceeded to take out his whole team pretty easily. The second Elite Four member was a bit tougher, but not by much. It basically just ended up being a classic flail sweep. She used ground types that were pretty strong defensively, so rather than buffing Magikarp's defense, I focused on attack right from the start, and then spammed Flail when its HP got low. This worked perfectly for the most part. Sometimes something like a Sandstorm would force me to heal, but I didn't have any big issues. The third Elite Four fight kinda sucked. I went into the battle thinking I'd try the same strategy as the last fight. It did work pretty well at first, but then he sent out a Steelix. I got risky and used Flail anyway, despite my past experiences with Steelix, and sure enough it didn't go down. But thankfully its attack missed, so I was able to heal. Fighting this thing sucked as usual though. It could lower Magikarp's defense, it could lower Magikarp's speed, and it had powerful attacks. And also as usual, it didn't take much damage from Magikarp's attacks at all. In the end, I gave up on buffing Magikarp's defense, and used the fact that Steelix lowered Magikarp's speed to my advantage. I could see approximately how much an attack from it did, and then use Flail when I knew it would drop Magikarp's HP low enough for it to do good damage. It took a while, but I eventually won. But his final Pokemon was actually an even bigger problem. Drifblim is immune to Magikarp's normal attacks, so I had to use Struggle to attack it. This was not the reason I was trying to lower Magikarp's PP. I'd been so focused on planning for the champion fight that I actually forgot that this guy had this. So I ended up buffing Magikarp's stats up, and then used up all of its remaining PP so I could attack with Struggle. It was a very time-consuming battle, but I eventually managed to win. With that done, I had a choice to make. As I mentioned, I wanted Magikarp's PP to be as low as possible for the final battle. I hadn't been expecting to drop it all the way to 0 against the third Elite Four member, but I figured that before I used the Lepa Berries to heal Magikarp's PP, I should try to defeat the fourth member with Struggle, since that would be the simplest way to guarantee I got to the champion with 0 PP. This actually ended up working pretty well. As long as Mr. Mime didn't get a critical hit, it was a pretty simple battle of just buffing up Magikarp's stats, and then attacking with Struggle and healing as necessary. And with that out of the way, it was time for the final battle against Champion Cynthia. A lot of decisions I'd made throughout the game were actually in preparation for this fight. The decision to EV train Magikarp's special defense, the max elixir I'd grabbed and never used, the plan to lower Magikarp's PP as much as possible against the Elite Four, and even the Pokeballs I'd purchased earlier. All of these things were done in preparation for Cynthia's first Pokemon specifically. This fight was also the other reason I played Diamond instead of Platinum. This version of the fight actually seems to more directly counter Magikarp, which made it seem like more of a fun puzzle to solve. So here's the deal with this fight. Her first Pokemon, Spiritomb, can't be hit by Magikarp's normal attacks. And in Diamond and Pearl specifically, and not Platinum or even the remakes, Spiritomb has Embargo, the move that prevents items from being used on Magikarp. So you can see the issue here. Magikarp can only damage Spiritomb with Struggle, which does recoil damage, but Spiritomb can prevent items from being used on Magikarp. Without being able to heal, once Embargo is used, it seems like I've got no choice but to struggle until Magikarp knocks itself out. Or so you might think. I started the battle by racing to apply as many special defense buffs as possible before Spiritomb used Embargo for the first time. Once it did, I needed a way to pass my turn without forcing Magikarp to damage itself. So I opened the bag, and threw a Pokeball at Spiritomb. Cynthia blocked the ball, and just like that I'd passed my turn safely. Embargo prevents items from being used on Magikarp, but Pokeballs don't get used on it, so you can use them with Embargo in effect. So then I just had to wait until Embargo wore off, spamming Pokeballs every turn, and watching as Magikarp's HP ticked down from Spiritomb's attacks, hoping it wouldn't reach 0 before I was able to heal it. Once Embargo wore off, I healed and then went back to buffing. And this strategy on its own actually is enough to defeat Spiritomb, if you just want to stall until it defeats itself with Struggle. But to defeat it myself, I slowly but surely buffed up special defense and then attack between Embargos. I didn't buff physical defense, since it would take too long and I didn't want to risk a critical hit. Once Magikarp was buffed up, I had to make sure that I didn't defeat Spiritomb while Embargo was still active, because that would mean I couldn't heal against our next Pokemon. So when I finally got to a turn where Spiritomb's HP was low enough and Embargo wasn't active, I attacked and took it down. The next Pokemon was Roserade. It had a super effective move, but since Magikarp's special defense was already buffed, it wasn't too scary. But I didn't feel like this was the time to buff Magikarp's physical defense either, because a critical hit super effective move on it would be bad. I used the max elixir I'd picked up to heal all of Magikarp's PP back to full, then used Flail to take it out. Next up was Garchomp. This thing was scary. It focused on physical attacks, and since I hadn't been able to buff physical defense yet, it hit like a truck. But thankfully, it had to spend a turn recovering when it used the move Giga Impact, so I used those openings to use Flail to take advantage of the damage I'd taken, and managed to take it down within a few turns. Once I made it to Gastrodon, I felt like I could finally take a breather, so I took the chance to buff up Magikarp's physical defense, and then defeated it easily enough. None of her remaining Pokemon had any crazy tricks up their sleeves like Spiritomb, so now that Magikarp was fully buffed, the rest of the battle actually went pretty smoothly. I took Lucario down with a few tackles, did the same to my Lodic, and finally won the fight. And with that, the adventure was over. You can indeed beat Pokémon Diamond and Pearl using only a Magikarp. Cynthia praised my abilities despite me attempting to steal her Pokémon dozens of times. The professor who sent a child to fight violent criminals for him appeared to witness crowning glory, and the incredible feats of Carpet and Carpet were recorded into the Hall of Fame for all eternity. To be honest, I actually had a lot of fun with this challenge. Getting up to level 30 back at the very start was a major chore, but once things got rolling, I thought things stayed interesting almost the whole way through. My approach for most major battles involved using the stat buffing items, but many battles needed unique approaches beyond that, and it always felt like there was something strange around the corner to look forward to, like having entire routes made inaccessible by type disadvantages, or having Pokeballs play a crucial role in winning the champion battle. I had a lot of fun with it, so if you thought this looked fun at all and can bear to sit through the early game level grinding, then honestly I think this challenge is worth a try. I hope you enjoyed and thanks for watching.